We all disappoint our dads from time to time. It is almost a rite of passage that we all face. Maybe you refuse to take over the family business, or maybe you fail to continue the bloodline. Whatever the case, disappointing our dads is inevitable. However, many of the fathers in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon take their disappointment in their children to a whole other level. For that reason, to celebrate Father's Day, I will count down the top 10 disappointed dads in Hot D and Game of Thrones. Kicking things off at number 10 is Lionel Strong. The disappointment of a father can take many different forms, but one that really hits hard is the disappointment Lionel Strong directs towards his firstborn son Harwin. After it is made clear that Harwin and Rhaenyra have been clapping cheeks and all of Rhaenyra's children are actually Harwin's and not her lawful husbands Laen or Velaryon, Lionel expresses his disappointment in his son. In his eyes, his son has been foolish in his pursuits of the princess, and his actions have placed not only House Strong in a precarious position, but Harwin has also now muddied the line of succession as all of Rhaenyra's children are bastards. There is something so raw in this exchange between father and son. You can tell Lionel truly does care about his son despite their strained relationship, and in an ironic twist, he could have averted the entire situation. Lionel once had the opportunity to put his son forward as a candidate for Rhaenyra's hand in marriage. Had Lionel been more self-serving and suggested his own kin like many others did, the realm might have been better for it. Perhaps Lionel's disappointment in his son is merely a reflection of the disappointment he has in his own actions. Next up at number 10 is Roose Bolton. Roose Bolton's relationship with his bastard son Ramsay is defined by cold pragmatism and an underlying disappointment. Years before the main series, in the books at least, Roose had a true-born son and heir named Domeric Bolton. Domeric was a son to be proud of. Although he was quiet, he was an accomplished horseman who loved to study the histories. When Dom learned of his bastard half-brother Ramsay, he sought him out despite his father's warnings. But Domeric did not find a loyal brother to rely on, and soon after meeting Ramsay, he died. Roose suspects that Ramsay slew his own brother so that he would be forced to make Ramsay his heir. And to be honest, it worked. After Domeric's death, Ramsay was brought to the Dreadfort, but Roose soon realizes Ramsay's true nature, so he tried to teach the boy to incorporate his creed of a peaceful land leads to a quiet people, in the hopes that Ramsay would take on this advice and use it if he ever hopes to lead. In both the show and the books, Roose is portrayed as a strategic schemer who navigates both war and politics with the best of them. However, where Roose is surgical in his approach, Ramsay is a butcher, using pain, torture, and fear to achieve his goals. Although he does not outright state it, it is evident that Roose is disappointed in his son's sadistic nature and Ramsay's failure to heed his father's advice and alter his approach to war and politics. Likewise, Roose in the books is indifferent and likely disappointed in Domeric's failure to not recognize Ramsay as a threat. Next up, we got Walder Frey, who is almost 100 years old and has possibly clapped more cheeks than anyone in Westeros, resulting in countless true-born children and bastards. He treats his children more as political currency and can barely remember some of their names. Walder expresses disappointment numerous times towards his children for their actions, morals, and intellect. However, above all, Walder does believe blood is blood, and it is his primary responsibility to take care of his own. He does this in large part by arranging marriages of his brood to anyone who can provide even a slight advantage for House Frey. So despite being disappointed by pretty much all of his children, Old Man Frey will always have their back. In House of the Dragon, Daemon is portrayed to have a terrible relationship with his children Baelor and Rhaena. For the most part, he outright ignores them in pursuit of his own goals. At his core, Daemon is a man who values strength, ambition, and his cultural roots as a Targaryen. To Daemon, his daughters don't truly reflect the ideals that he strives for. Of his two children, Baelor comes closest to meeting his expectations. She is fierce like him and has hatched and claimed the dragon Moondancer, which proves that she is blood of the dragon like Daemon wants. But despite this, Daemon is dismissive of Baelor, literally walking past her without a word in a few scenes. But Daemon's true disappointment lies with Rhaena, who never hatched nor claimed a dragon of her own. Rhaena confides to her mother that she believes this is the reason why Daemon does not spend any time with her. and to be honest, she is probably right. But Daemon's disappointment in his children might be more rooted in the patriarchal system of rule within Westeros. In the eyes of Westeros, a male heir is essential to inherit and carry on one's legacy. Perhaps, on a subconscious level, Daemon's disappointment in his daughters is purely based on their gender. But there is hope. At the end of Season 2, Daemon accepted Rhaenyra's rule as a woman, which might represent a shift in how he treats his daughters as well. Furthermore, Daemon in the books somewhat recognizes his failings to his daughters, and towards the end of his life, he made an effort to dote upon the book character Nettles, who was rumored to be his daughter. Season 2 implied that Nettles and Rhaenyra's stories have been blended together, so perhaps in Season 3 and 4 he will make amends with his daughters. At number 6 we got Big Bobby B himself. Robert Baratheon's disappointment in Joffrey is beyond obvious. Although Robert is largely an absentee father, when he does reflect on his son, it is with a mix of frustration, shame, and regret. Robert, despite his many flaws, was once a charismatic, larger-than-life warrior, brave, strong, and beloved by many. But in his son Joffrey, he sees none of those qualities. Joffrey is cruel, cowardly, and arrogant. He lacks any of Robert's martial abilities or personal charm. Instead, he displays a sadistic streak that repulses everyone. Robert, who idolizes strength and honor, cannot respect Joffrey at all, especially after he is defeated and disarmed by a little girl, Arya Stark. In Season 1, Robert laments the boy's character and bitterly admits that it is partially his own fault for not taking an interest in training the boy. This rare moment of vulnerability shows how deeply Robert is disappointed in his son, but also himself for failing as a father. Next up is Craster. In Game of Thrones, Craster's family dynamic is horrific. A man who values his children as nothing more than a resource. His daughters are a way to expand his rotten bloodline, and his sons are a sacrificial gift to the White Walkers, which seemingly earn him a level of protection. To say Craster is disappointed in his children is perhaps misguided, as it implies that he has the capacity to be proud of them at all. Jeor Mormont's disappointment in his son Jorah runs deep, rooted in both personal shame and the tarnishing of House Mormont's honor. And unlike the other father-son relationships on this list, it really hits you in the feels. By all accounts, Jeor was a great father. He even abdicated his seat at the head of House Mormont so that his son Jorah could rule. But Jorah didn't just step aside for his son. He went the extra step and removed himself from the equation entirely by joining the Night's Watch and relinquishing all claim on House Mormont and Bear Island. Both as a father and Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Jeor embodies duty, sacrifice, and a strong sense of honor. These were values that he expected his son to uphold as heir to Bear Island, but Jorah's choices reflected the opposite. Sometime before the main series, Jorah disgraced himself by selling poachers into slavery to fund an extravagant lifestyle for his noble wife. This violation of Westerosi law led to his exile, and he was stripped of his land's title and family name. For Jeor, who had given up his lordship to serve the Watch, Jorah's actions were a personal betrayal and a stain on the Mormont legacy. In Jeor's eyes, Jorah chose personal comfort and vanity over duty and integrity. He saw it as a selfishness that sharply contrasted with Jeor's own life of service. Though Jeor rarely speaks of Jorah directly, the few times that he does mention his son, it is clear there is an undercurrent of sorrow and disappointment. Jeor's decision to take Jon Snow under his wing almost feels like an unconscious attempt to place Jon as the son that Jorah could never be. But in the end, Jeor's disappointment runs deep. Not only does he lament the exile of his son, but also the shattered legacy that he brought upon House Mormont. At number 3, we have Randyll Tarly. Randyll Tarly's disappointment in his son, Samwell, is one of the most bitter and heartbreaking father-son dynamics in Game of Thrones. As the head of House Tarly, Randyll embodies the ideals of a Westerosi nobleman: strength, discipline, martial prowess, and honor. Qualities he desperately wanted to see in his son. But Sam was different. He had a love for books, music, and learning, and an aversion to violence and combat. These were all qualities that Randyll despised in a man. To Randyll, Sam's softness was not only a personal affront, but he also saw it as a threat to the legacy of House Tarly, which he believed would not survive with a man like like Sam at its head. Instead of nurturing Sam's gifts, Randyll subjected his son to cruelty and humiliation, hoping to harden him. But when that failed, he gave Sam a brutal ultimatum: join the Night's Watch or face a hunting accident that would conveniently remove him from the line of succession. Randyll's disappointment was rooted not only in personal shame but in fear that his house would fall into ruin if it was led by a son he viewed as weak. Ironically, the very qualities that Randyll mocked, Sam's intelligence, compassion, and curiosity, would later prove game-changing. Sam played a crucial role in fighting against the White Walkers, discovering vital knowledge, and even uncovered Jon Snow's true heritage. In the end, Sam became a hero in his own right, despite, or perhaps because of his father's relentless disappointment. Balon Greyjoy's disappointment in his son Theon runs deep, shaped by years of pride, rebellion, and humiliation. After Balon's failed rebellion against Robert Baratheon, Theon was taken as a hostage and ward of Eddard Stark. Theon's absence was a constant reminder of Balon's defeat and submission to the Iron Throne. In Balon's eyes, Theon grew up more as a Stark than a Greyjoy, absorbing northern customs and values that Balon viewed as weak and foreign to the Ironborn way of life. But more than that, Theon represented Balon's failed rebellion, which saw the death of his two eldest sons. When Theon finally returned to Pike, eager to reclaim his place as heir, Balon saw not a worthy son but a stranger. Theon's attempts to please his father only deepened Balon's contempt. Balon viewed Theon's need for approval as pathetic, and his desperate attempts to prove himself, such as a reckless seizure of Winterfell, did little to earn Balon's respect. If anything, Theon's failure at Winterfell, his capture and subsequent torture by Ramsay Bolton only further cemented Balon's belief that Theon was weak and unworthy of the Ironborn legacy. Additionally, when Balon is gifted Theon's member from Ramsay, Balon's view of his son shifts even more. Now that Theon is no longer capable of producing an heir and furthering Balon's bloodline, he is nothing to him. Their relationship stands as one of the most tragic father-son failures in Game of Thrones, where Theon's quest for daddy's approval leads only to bitterness and ruin. Coming in at the number one spot is Tywin Lannister. Was there ever any doubt? Tywin's disappointment in his children is threefold, with each of them failing in their own ways to live up to his expectations. Tywin's firstborn son, Jaime, should have been the pride of House Lannister. He had everything Tywin desired in an heir: a capable warrior, charismatic with a strategic mind, and yet Jaime found a way to disappoint his father through his choices that were rooted in honorable intention. Rather than carry on the Lannister name as Lord of Casterly Rock, Jaime joined the Kingsguard, a lifelong vow that stripped him of lands, titles, and the ability to marry and produce legitimate heirs. Tywin saw this as a betrayal of Jaime's duties to the family. Tywin is further disappointed by Jaime when he returns missing a hand. Tywin offers his son an opportunity to leave the Kingsguard and finally fulfill his duty as heir. However, Jaime refuses him, adding even more to Tywin's disappointment in him. Tywin's disappointment isn't just reserved for Jaime, it extends to all of his children. Cersei possesses much of her father's ambition and cunning. She is fiercely loyal to family and desperately seeks her father's approval. However, Tywin's disappointment in Cersei comes from her impulsive nature and gender. In Tywin's mind, the best way that Cersei can serve the house is through marriage alliances, and not through her political ambition. But Cersei's refusal to accept her place in Tywin's legacy leaves him disappointed. Tywin's disappointment in his two eldest children has to be further amplified by their incestuous relationship, even if he does not admit the reality to himself. But among his children, Tyrion is the child who draws the sharpest and most personal disappointment from Tywin. From the moment of Tyrion's birth, which resulted in the death of Tywin's beloved Joanna, Tywin has viewed his younger son as a curse on the family, and Tyrion's dwarfism only intensifies his father's contempt. Ironically, Tyrion is perhaps the most similar to Tywin. He has an intelligent mind built for political rule and an underlying capacity for cruelty and depravity. But Tywin is blinded by his disappointment in the circumstances of Tyrion's birth, and despite Tyrion being the heir to Casterly Rock and House Lannister by law, Tywin refuses to fill Tyrion's lawful inheritance, and to his dying breath, Tywin rejects Tyrion as no son of his, and dies disappointed in the legacy that he leaves. And that about does it. Thanks for watching, and remember to wish your dad happy Father's Day. Cheers.